Hey, what's going on, everybody? Dr. Sis here. So today I'm going to talk about the COVID vaccine that Pfizer's coming out with, that's being mass produced and just waiting for approval before they just start distributing it to everyone. And what's really crazy about this is I'm in the minority on this, and I think that it just blows my mind. So just starting off, let's just talk about Pfizer, right? It's such an upstanding, honest company that they've only been fined $4,747,000,000 since the year 2000. And of that, $1,161,000,000 went for false claims. So it's like they have this history of lying and fraud and all kinds of stuff. Then when it comes to this vaccine, where they can't be sued and can't be held liable, we're supposed to expect them to be perfect angels and have really good, honest data. And it's just, I have a really hard time trusting that, right? But let's look at their data. So here's what they put out. They did a study, and they had 43,500-ish people, and they split it into two groups. One group got the 2 COVID shots, the other group didn't. And then after a few weeks, a couple months, they look at the numbers. So out of 43,500 people, 170, that's it. Only 170 people out of all these tens of thousands caught COVID. And of that, in the no-shot group, 162 of them of the 170 were the positives. So they did the math, and they're like, oh, 95% effective. This is amazing. We now need to mass produce this shot and give it to everybody, because this is the end game, right? It's mask, distance, isolate, lockdown, try and hide from the virus as much as possible until a vaccine comes out with a study of 170 COVID cases, and now you want to give this shot to everybody, all right? But I have a lot of questions about this, a lot. I'm going to go over some of them, a lot of concerns. But first off, let's just look at these numbers. Let's look at the numbers a little differently. So out of 21,769 people, 162 people who didn't get a shot got COVID, which means that 99.9925% of people didn't get COVID. And in the shot group, 99.9996% of people didn't get COVID, for a whopping difference of 0.0035%. Doesn't sound as amazing that way, but going a step further, how many people died? Because that's the whole purpose, right? That's why the big billboard as I drive past here is mask, distance, wash your hands, save lives. Like, that's saving lives. That's the whole goal. How many lives was this shown to have saved? 0. Nobody died in either group, right? And the study doesn't show that getting the shot stops you from transmitting the virus to anybody else. All it did was reduce cases. Out of 170 people who caught COVID, less people had COVID in the COVID shot group. Now, you may be like, well, if less people have it, that means less people are going to have complications, which means less people are going to die, right? That's kind of the thinking, but does it work that way? So they couldn't come up with a COVID shot forever, and now in 6 months, boom, we have it, or 9 months, whatever. And we've had a flu shot for decades, okay? So now who's the highest at risk for dying of COVID? Older people, the elderly, over 65 for sure. That's the high-risk demographic for sure. So how well does the flu shot, right? You're here every year right now. Make sure your flu shot too is your best defense against the flu. Best defense of what? To prevent you from dying, right? Like, that's the whole purpose, save lives. So the flu shot that's been around for decades, and people over 65. So now this first study, I'm going to read it. It's from the Cochrane collaboration. They looked at all the studies out there, right? And this is the conclusion they came up with. The evidence for a lower risk of influenza with vaccination is limited by biases in the design or conduct of the studies. Like, who makes biased or poor conduct studies? Right? They go on. The available evidence relating to complications is of poor quality, insufficient, old, and provides no clear guidance for public health regarding the safety, we don't know if it's safe, efficacy or effectiveness for people over 65. In the next study, this just came out a few months ago, 170 million cases of the flu, 7.6 million deaths. For people over 65 years old, they found 0 evidence that vaccination reduced hospitalizations or mortality among elderly persons. No evidence. So, the flu shot that's been around decades, not my opinion, based on the research, has no evidence that it reduces deaths in people over 65. And then you have 170 people that got positive COVIDs, nobody died, and now we're gonna mass produce it and give it to everybody to save lives. Call me crazy for questioning that, but let me take this even further. When they put these study groups together, what kind of people do you think they picked to put in the 43,500? How many of those people were over 75 in the high risk group? How many of those people were a morbidly obese American? How many of those people had autoimmune diseases? How many of those people were on 5, 10, 15, 20? I've seen people on 40 plus medications. How many people in this group were on 15 medications, obese, diabetic, and 76 years old living in an assisted living home? Zero, right? So they say they're safe. They're safe based on healthy people, not based on this. What about this? What if you give someone one of the COVID shots, a week later give them a flu shot, and then a week later give them another COVID shot? What is the possible consequences of that? What about people like with autoimmune diseases, right, giving more vaccines? What about pregnant women, right? Because eventually they're going to want to give this to everybody. What about kids? How many 3-year-olds are in this study? How many 2-year-olds how many 6-month-old kids that they give flu shots to are there flu shot studies for? Look that up. It's not what you think. So it's like, and then you have to ask, like, what are the side effects? What are the side effects given to a healthy person? What are the side effects if you give this to an elderly person that's obese and sick and on multiple medications? Like, you're not going to see that in the study. Here's one trick that they do, and this is very, very clever. So one of the potential side effects of getting an immune-stimulating shot, multiple immune-stimulating shots into your body, is creating autoimmune diseases, right? But those take months, even years to develop before you can tell. So what they do is they say, see, this works. To not give the shot to the placebo group is unethical, so we better give all the people in the placebo group a shot as soon as possible, so that way, months, years down the road, you can't compare the two groups and say, look at this. The people in the placebo group have far less autoimmune disorders than the people who got the 2 shots, right? It's very, very clever. So speaking of side effects, I gotta read this, because this is mind-blowing. So this is right from the CDC Advisory Committee. Say, this is quote, we really need to make patients aware that this is not going to be a walk in the park. They're going to know they got a vaccine. They're probably not going to feel wonderful, but they need to come back for that second dose. They're going to feel high fever, body aches, bad headaches, day-long exhaustion, and other symptoms after receiving the shots. This is so crazy. But people, you need to toughen up. The first dose is no big deal. But the second dose is definitely going to put you down for the day for sure. Now this is where they treat you like a moron. So here's what they say. So when you have headaches, migraines, sick all day, feel like hell, that's not an adverse event. That's not an adverse reaction. That's an immune response. Say, we should use language such as response instead of adverse reactions. Like we need to tell people when you feel like shit, because it's making you sick, you're not having a bad reaction. You're just having an immune response. That's your immune system working and making you healthier. It's insane to me. Like, there is zero chance I'm going to be a guinea pig to this, but I'm the minority, right? And it's like, why am I the minority? Why are the majority of Americans running out wanting to get this shot? Is because I don't think, well, I know, it's like they don't show like truly where these numbers come from, right? Anyhow, so that's my thoughts on this shot. And there's 2 other ones out there. It was really interesting, though, there was the Oxford one where they somehow screwed up, where a group of people only got a half dose of the vaccine and they had better outcomes than people who got the full dose. It's just like, there's just no way I'm gonna be a guinea pig for this, right? So I'm gonna go over my approach. And here's a study from Nature that came out like the same as I was going through this popped up. Really interesting. So out of 154 people, here 170, 154, not a huge difference, right? Of the people in ICU, in intensive care unit, 96.82% of them were deficient in vitamin D. Of the people that were asymptomatic, it was far less, right? So the people whose vitamin D levels was about 28 were far more likely to be asymptomatic than the people who had low vitamin D levels. But going on, so of 63 people that were in the intensive care unit, 52% of them were severely deficient in vitamin D, 9 were deficient, and only 2 were sufficient in vitamin D. But here's the thing, their definition of sufficient is 25. Like, I'd like to be around 50. So their idea of sufficient to me is still very deficient, but this is huge. Just by taking vitamin D, and what's really great about vitamin D is like, so when they do these shots, when they do the flu shots, the trivalent, there's 3 strains, so it's just to try, in theory, protect a person from those 3 specific strains of the flu. And this is, specifically for COVID-19, this COVID shot. When you take vitamin D, it stimulates or boosts your innate immune system. So that's the immune system that's just on the guard for any foreign invader, any virus, any strain, anything. Your immune system recognizes it, attacks it, and kills it. An asymptomatic carrier, what that means is a healthy person. What's a healthy person? Someone who has sufficient levels of vitamin D, someone who has good nutrition in their body, someone who's not morbidly obese, someone who exercises. And by the way, when I say obesity, I'm going to make a separate video on this. It's a very broad term, right? A very, very broad term, which I need to explain because it's a lot to understand. But anyhow, straight from the study, this isn't me saying this. Vitamin D promotes the innate immune system, which balances the immune response and provides an overall anti-inflammatory response, which is good because you hear about COVID and the cytokine storm and all this stuff, and one of the treatments is to give steroids in the hospital to bring down that inflammatory response, right? It's like, well, why? Because our lifestyles are really poor, so we eat tons of bad food, which damages us, so we're just chronically pro-inflamed, and then we're more susceptible to have a hyper-inflammatory response, and our vitamin D levels are really low, so we don't have enough vitamin D to kind of put the brakes on that response. But going on, here's the conclusion from this study on vitamin D. It's so important. Vitamin D deficiency markedly increases the chance of having severe disease after infection with SARS-CoV-19. So vitamin D isn't like a force field that blocks vitamin D. What it does is once you become in contact with it, you don't get symptoms. Like, it just helps your body kill it. And if anything, you have very minor symptoms, you build up an immune response, and then you're immune from it. Right? So it's like, to me, I would rather live this lifestyle, just get COVID. If I haven't got it already, I fully intend to. And then my immune system has helped to kill it, and then I'm immune, so I can't spread it to anybody else. I just think that's a really healthy, intelligent, ethical approach. But moving on, what they say is the intensity of inflammatory response is also higher if you're deficient, if you're low in vitamin D. This all translates to increased morbidity and mortality, more death in patients who are vitamin D deficient. Wow, so really, really great approach. Get your vitamin D levels up so it protects you against COVID plus everything else. Eat really good food with zero risk of possible immune response, right? Adverse effects from getting this shot. To me, that just seems like the most intelligent, sensible approach. And that's why, too, if you looked at the UK, they're going to start administering vitamin D to high-risk people. Only 400 IUs per day. I'd have that in the 5,000 to 10,000 range. But it's actually a step in the right direction, so that's really cool. So, my big issue with all this, if you want to go out and get shots, I could care less, right? It's totally your choice. The same way you can go out and smoke cigarettes and drive through McDonald's and drink a case of soda and whatever. Adult, it's your choice. Here's where I have an issue, is just the way things are going. So they mandate masks, right? All right, let's get everyone, you have to wear a mask or you can't go into a store. You can't go in public. You can't do this. We're mandating masks. My issue is they start trying to mandate this shit, right? It's like, hey, your kid can't go play at this place unless they get their COVID shot, 2 COVID shots plus their flu shot. There's just no freaking way, and that's kind of where it looks like it's heading, and that's a huge problem. Yeah, it's really scary. But anyhow, after seeing this, how in God's name am I in the minority on this stupid shot?